You're listening to STRUTCAST, weekly podcast dedicated to everything spring turkey hunting. All right, Monday morning following what was opening weekend, Mississippi, Alabama anyway, opening weekend. And I spent the weekend in Alabama, and I know a lot of people spent the weekend in the woods. So we're going to jump into episode 4, and we have got an information-packed episode 4 with Miss Betsy Dutoit, District Biologist in the state of Louisiana for the NWTF. We're going to talk a lot about the NWTF and a lot of, really detailed information about her job and what's going on regionally and nationally and etc. So before we get into that, I'll remind you that the code STRUTCAST with SKRE will get you a 10% discount at checkout. SKRE, S-K-R-E, performance-based apparel, camo hunting gear, lifetime warranty, high-end products, anatomical fit, size guarantee, direct-to-consumer business model, makes pricing more responsible, and the SKRE Summit pattern looks great in the spring wood. So again, if you use the code STRUTCAST at checkout, you can get a 10% discount, and you can find everything you need to know in terms of finding out more about SKRE at SKREgear.com and find them on Facebook and Instagram. You can also research on my pages, plenty of turkey hunting footage and photos with SKRE gear out in the field. So also, we're going to talk a little bit here reporting. We're going to do a more in-depth podcast later this week, kind of recapping our weekend, myself and Jordan, and we're going to talk to some other people and kind of recap the opening weekend in Alabama and Mississippi, being, two big turkey hunting states that opened this weekend. But so I won't go too much into that from my perspective as far as how my weekend went. I'll tease you. It was exciting and it was disappointing at the same time, but we're going to get into that more on the next episode. But as far as just a general report goes, most everybody I talked to said the same thing. Early season in the South is pretty typical. Henned-up birds gobble a little bit. Hard to keep their attention. They're with hens. They're not going to get real hot, gobble on the limb, or gobble a few times on the ground, get henned up, and can't really do much with them. And that's basically what we experienced. And that's what I heard from a lot of people. So I know a lot of people kill turkeys. A lot of people got on turkeys. There's always going to be those subdominant birds that don't get run off or are not with hens, and plenty of those birds around and plenty of people that were able to make it happen. But by and large, henned up turkeys are going to be the story early season in these earlier opening states, and that's what I've heard from North Mississippi to South Mississippi and all parts of Alabama that I talked to people was, pretty weather. Birds gobble pretty good early or gobble good in short periods of time, but that wasn't sustainable. Hard to get on them, hard to stay on them just with hens. So just look for the warmer weather and the progression of the spring to pick that up, and we'll start getting some of those hens nesting and some of the flock breaking up a little bit, and maybe you'll be able to get on a bird that'll gobble a little bit more if that's what you're experiencing. So I'm going to go and turn it over to our conversation with Betsy. If you're a member of the NWTF, if you've been involved in the NWTF, you're going to want to listen to this. There's a lot of information here that maybe you've never really heard before, so let's go talk to Betsy. I have Miss Betsy Dutoit here on the line with me for this podcast, and Betsy is the District Biologist for Louisiana for the NWTF. So introduce yourself for us a little bit, Betsy.
All right. So, like you said, my name is Betsy Dutoit, and I'm the District Biologist for the NWTF here in Louisiana. And basically, my job entails me to assist state and federal partners and private landowners in the management of the wild turkey here in Louisiana.
So, I think probably everyone listening and everyone that has any stake in being a turkey hunter is obviously familiar with the NWTF. So how long have you been working for the NWTF?
About 3 years.
And you've been in Louisiana that entire time, correct?
Yeah, I moved to Louisiana back in 2013. And I was originally working with deer, but 3 years ago I had an opportunity to switch to team turkey, and I took it.
Cool. Okay. So are you a turkey hunter as well?
I am a turkey hunter. I'm not a super avid turkey hunter. I didn't grow up hunting turkeys. It wasn't until I was an adult that I really kind of took on turkey hunting. I was raised to do just your basic deer hunting, but as I got older, I got into turkeys and ducks and everything else. So
Kind of comes with the job, huh?
it does. It opened up a lot of opportunities. The more I got involved with wildlife biology, the more friends I made, and that definitely helped.
Yeah. Well, before we get too deep into some of the information that you have to share, the most important question for me in this podcast is you got to tell us a little bit about this vintage Big Red, Honda Big Red that you have.
We have, I think, 13 of them now.
Wow.
Actually, so my husband's birthday is Saturday, and he does not have a 1986. So we're trying to get like at least one of every year model made, of one of every year of every model. And I found a 1986 250 ES, and so I bought it for him and surprised him with it. So he's pretty pumped. So now we have all the Big Red 250 ESs, and now we're working on the 70s and the 350Xs, and
So
it's gotten out of control. The vintage Hondas in our house it's out of control.
So you gotta have a pretty big barn for all this, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we've been trying to pour concrete since about Thanksgiving, but it won't quit raining. We got plans to put a new shop in just because they've completely taken over our old shop. So.
Yeah, welcome to Louisiana. But
That's right.
If you don't follow Betsy on Instagram and social media, you can. What's your handle?
I think it's just Betsy Dutoit.
And Dutoit is Dutoit, correct?
That's right.
Yep. If you follow Betsy, she posts pictures of these 3-wheelers and stuff, and they're pretty sweet. So anyway, I digress. I had to ask because that's my favorite part of your social media, because it just takes me back to when I was a kid. That's all we had. My dad and I both had Honda 3-wheelers, and that's what I grew up hunting on. So it's really cool. I love those vintage bikes. Yeah. But so NWTF, I mean, that's a lot what we're doing here with this podcast. With your position there, you obviously have a wealth of knowledge in that field and kind of what they're doing. So I want to talk about a lot of different things, but for people that may not know, because I'm sure a lot of people who haven't been an active member of the NWTF probably wonder, I see this big organization and I see them everywhere, especially as it pertains to spring turkey season, obviously, and what do they do? So, I mean, what's the kind of the 30,000-foot view of what the NWTF is doing in 2019?
Okay, so a lot of what we're doing now has a lot to do with what we've done in the past, so I kind of have to start with the beginning to let you know how we got here. So we were founded in 1973, back when turkeys were just about wiped out. I think there's only about 1 million turkeys left across the United States and only a handful of states. And so a couple of guys, I imagine, sitting around a campfire drinking some beers, decided that they were going to form an organization to help the wild turkey. And so in 1975, they formed a technical committee, and basically NWTF was a way to bring different state organizations together. So a representative from each state, get them all in a room together and figure out what can we do to save the turkey. And so from those meetings and that networking, we came up with the Target 2000, which was in the late 80s. And Target 2000 was essentially our attempt at getting wild turkeys trapped and transferred and populations established in every available habitat across the United States. And it was a wildly successful program. They trapped turkeys, they took them all over to different parts of the country, dropped them off. Those turkeys established new populations, they grew, and they did great. Until a couple years of being maybe over-harvested, or bad weather, or predators or urbanization. There's just a swath of things that kind of cause them to decline again. So that brings us to where we are today. We have a new mission that's called Save the Habitat, Save the Hunt, and that's our initiative to enhance the habitat so that if we ever need to relocate these turkeys, they actually have quality habitat to where they can raise a lot of poults and establish viable populations. So along with that, Save the Habitat, Save the Hunt, the 10-year goal is to conserve and enhance 4 million acres, recruit 1.5 million new hunters and shooters, and open access to 500,000 acres for public use.
So, I know you said you listened to my last podcast with Mr. Moreland and Mr. Stafford, and a lot of biology and science in that too. And then as a hunter as well, I'm also real sensitive to the idea that from, let's say, over the last 25 years, that would have put me as an early teen, just, getting to the point where I could really turkey hunt and really get into it, until now, at least in my home range, being Mississippi and Louisiana, and, this general southeastern Gulf Coast area, southwestern Mississippi, and down here in Louisiana, there is quite obviously a decline in turkey numbers. And like you mentioned, there's a whole lot of things that play a factor in that, but I'm also one that's fortunate enough to travel, and I hunt a lot of places, and, it's not that way everywhere, and I don't have any metric to compare it against, because until the last 5 or 6 years, I haven't been one that had the ability to travel and hunt lots of different states. But, there's an obvious decline, and I wonder, is that recognized by the NWTF, or is that just a hunter's perception, or where's the NWTF stand on that from a regional perspective?
So, as far as the Southeast is concerned, Jimmy mentioned this in your previous podcast, we have a Southeast Wild Turkey Working Group meeting, which is all of the turkey reps from each of the states in the Southeast, basically from like Texas up into West Virginia, and that they meet annually to discuss all things turkey management, research, just about everything. And so we are invited, each of the district biologists from those states, to attend those meetings, and the consensus has been pretty much through the Southeast that a lot of these states are seeing declines in turkeys. We're seeing a decline in hunter harvest. We're seeing a decline in our poult count surveys. It's pretty understood that most of the Southeast, I think places like Kentucky, Tennessee, maybe Missouri are doing okay. However, if you look at, I can't remember if it's Tennessee or Kentucky, some areas of the states are seeing a decline. Other areas of the state are seeing steady, and then other areas of the states are actually seeing an increase. There's little caveats here and there, but for the most part, the Southeast is on a decline, and that's definitely recognized by the biologists that are involved.
Well, I would say, and again, this is a small view from one person that spends a lot of time around the sport, turkeys and turkey hunting. When I was a teenager, I hunted in southwest Mississippi where I grew up, and my dad, my granddad, they were members of a large deer lease, something to the tune of 10,000 plus acres. And that was before the timber company started busting these big leases up and leasing smaller tracts, 2 and 3 and 400 acres. And, we had a large deer lease, a big social type thing, but of the 30 plus members in that deer lease, there were only 2 or 3 guys that turkey hunted. And it was absolutely nothing for us to go out on a nice spring morning, even on a bad spring morning, and hear the amount of turkeys in one day, in one morning before mid-morning that, now in that same area, you would have to hunt a month to hear that number of different birds. And I have noticed that, number one, my opinion is that in that day and age, there were cutovers and there were pine reforestation, but it was burned for the most part, and it was thinned pretty, what's the word? Not liberally, but it was thinned more than it is now. And, we still had a lot of hardwood. So I think that's a big contributing factor. But there's also, in that 20-year period, let's call it 20 years, all of our land bordered public access, National Forest and a WMA, and I could hunt our place and ride around, and I hardly, I might see 2 or 3 hunters in a tremendously large area. And now it's hard to find a place if you don't get there, if you don't have turkeys on private or you don't get there. So, I hear a lot of talk about recruitment of new hunters, but in my neck of the woods, the hunting on TV, the social media, the influence of media on the sport has created, even to the point where sometimes I tell myself there are not enough mature gobblers for the amount of people that are trying to harvest one, and they're not trying to harvest one, they're trying to harvest 3 in the state of Mississippi. And I can't help but believe that the idea of recruiting more hunters, it's needed from a global perspective or from a big picture, but in certain regions, we're overhunting them because their habitat's shrinking and the pressure is rising. Is that something that the NWTF recognizes in certain places?
Well, I can understand how, new hunters can be frustrating when you think that there's already like too many bodies in the woods, but when it comes down to it, hunters are the ones that pay for conservation through license sales and Pittman-Robertson tax on ammunition and firearms. And so as we see the decline as we see overall hunter numbers decline, we're starting to lose our ability to fund this dirt work that we're doing to improve the habitat. So there's definitely a goal to improve new hunters, just to have more advocates for the sport, but to fund the conservation work that needs done. But as far as too many people harvesting too many gobbers, I definitely sympathize with that because the bird population has been down and continues to go down, and you still have the same amount of people, if not more, constantly entering the woods because they want to be in the action like they see on TV or they see these pictures on Facebook, and yeah, they want to be a part of that, and it's definitely a lot of pressure, which again is why we're trying to open public access to an additional 500,000 acres, which, by the way, we met that goal this year. We're at 560,000 acres,
awesome.
New acres of public access. So actually, I'm going to take a minute to brag on Arkansas for a minute, because the state board up there last year decided to assist with the purchase of some additional acres to tack on to one of their existing WMAs. So through going to the banquets, you're spending money at these banquets, raising money, buying the license plates for your trucks and your cars, and then that money goes to a separate fund, and the state board allocated that fund to Arkansas Game and Fish, and they use that money to buy a bunch of land and open it up for public access. So that's just one of the ways that we're trying to assist with accommodating all of these new hunters.
That's really cool. It's cool to hear a specific scenario where your money's going. Because I know there's a lot of people that enjoy the banquets. It's a fun time, and they want to be supportive, but they've probably never heard something like that where they can tangibly put their hands on something where the money goes. So that's really cool. Back to what we were just talking about, it's a rock and a hard place. It's a catch-22, no doubt. And I don't want to discourage people from hunting and buying license and buying gear and everything, like you said, so that there is finance flowing through these systems in order to, one hand feeds the other type thing. But, at the same time, I look at the state of Louisiana, and I know it hasn't been popular And when it happened with the moving the season, shortening the season, and all that, I was kind of like, because I have some friends who have property that's close to the state line and other parts of the state where, they're leaving on a 1,000-acre piece of property. They're leaving a dozen or more mature gobblers every year. They can't kill them all. I mean, they can't hurt the population. They're getting their fair share and leaving birds gobbling at the end of every season. They're like, why are you doing this to us? And I sympathize with that, but in the big picture, with talking with Mr. David and talking with Mr. Jimmy, and I get it. And but at times, my home state of Mississippi, I wonder, I wish more states where it's very obvious in a large hunted population or hunted area population of hunters, such as Southwest Mississippi. There's very little doubt between whatever the factors are that the turkey numbers are down, but we're still opening the season. I took my son hunting last Friday. Most days, most times, most years during youth hunt, it's still cold. It's not spring. It's early. The birds aren't even close to nesting, and we're killing these birds that never get the chance to breed a hen, and we're killing them by the droves in early March. And every year, it becomes harder and harder. I've got several properties where I have permission to hunt, and it's kind of a torn between yourself because you realize that there's only one or two birds around, and if I kill him, I don't have a bird to hunt the rest of the year because there are no more. He's it. There's a couple of jakes, maybe one or two mature gobblers in the area, and if I go kill him on opening weekend, for me, I'm painting a theoretical or not a hypothetical here because for me, I go to other places and I'm not there to hunt that much. But for the guy who does have his 500-acre deer lease, where 10 years ago, there'd be 4 or 5 mature gobblers hanging around that area all spring. There's only one or two. And if he kills one and lets his kid kill one, his season's over. And if he does that year after year after year, eventually there's not going to be very many turkeys around there because he's killing them opening weekend before they breed. All the studies and all the science that have come down the pipe and that, is right there readily available, it applies in other places, and that's frustrating. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's frustrating to me, and I think between that and people just continuing to go the route of herbicide reforestation, and we're creating these thickets that not only are very hard to manage for turkeys, but they're absolute exceptional habitat for predators. And the two things combined are bad. And I understand it's a business, but a logging company, or not a logging company, but after a logging company does their timber work and they come back in, well, I mean, it's a lot cheaper to just let it grow thick and spray it with herbicide, right?
That's right.
But, that's not, what that creates is a thicket that every bobcat, fox, and coyote can absolutely rule. And a turkey, it takes, 7-8 years for it to even come close to sustainability for a turkey. And so, those things worry me, but we're going to talk more about the NWTF. I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole because that's been a common topic the last several years, and it's been a topic on this podcast the last couple of weeks since we started it. But so let's move on. Let's talk about sunshine and rainbows, okay?
It's easy to get, and it's easy to get sucked into
we're passionate
into
about
that stuff. Yeah. And people have a lot of feelings too, and I mean it's really political, like you said about the season change. I'm sure Mississippi is wanting to delay their season as well because they're part of that discussion at the technical committee Wild Turkey Working Group meeting. However, they got dealt the CWD hand and they're kind of busy dealing with that. And so these things are really political. And so you got to navigate your commission, whatever way is beneficial. And at the end of the day, you're there to manage the resource. And sometimes you got to manage the hunters as well. But if we piss a couple people off because they have to wait a week to hunt, I'm not too concerned about that because their kids and their grandkids might have a chance to hunt turkeys because of that change. Yeah. So, you got to kind of weigh your pros and cons. So, but yeah, it's totally easy to get sucked down that rabbit hole.
It's easy to develop that passion. For someone like me who has been turkey hunting in this area since I was a kid, old enough to hunt, and then as an adult have been able to go and hunt in other places where it's more like it was at home when I was a teenager. I go in April and I go hunt in Texas and Kansas and Missouri, and I'm like, wow, it used to be like this at home. Not the same landscape, but I used to be able to spend all day working on birds, and now I'm, like we said. But anyway, as we said, let's. I want to talk a little bit about the convention. You were able to attend the convention this year, right?
Yes. Well, as an employee, it was more like working at the convention.
Well, if people haven't, and I'm sure most people have heard, the NWTF does a big national convention in February prior to the spring every year, and it's at the Gaylord Opry.
In Nashville.
In Nashville, and that's where they have the Grand National Calling Contest, where they have the Grand National Champions and all the different categories, and there's also a big expo, and there's lots of seminars and other things like that. And if you you love the sport of turkey hunting, it's an awesome weekend to take the family and check out all the different things. But tell us a little bit about what went on this year, just so people can kind of get an idea of exactly what it is.
So this year at convention, I think we had record attendance again. We had about 56,000 people register and attend over the sports show, and I think we had over 400 vendor booths. So it's just a chance for people to showcase their products, avid turkey hunters to come and check out those products. You also get to come see our product showcase for like the upcoming banquet season and stuff like that. So you can get a lot of NWTF products while you're there. Obviously the National Calling Contest. But I think a lot of things that people think about NWTF show has to do with the convention floor and the sports show and the calling contest. However, the things that I think people don't realize that we also do is the conservation conference and the volunteer seminars. So while all that stuff is going on downstairs on the convention floor, if you take the elevator out to the second floor or the mezzanine level, there's a whole other side of what NWTF does at this sports show is conservation conference. And this year we talked a lot about funding conservation. We talked about R3, which is recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters. We had an Energy for Wildlife program, which helps big energy companies or pipeline companies or oil and gas companies get involved with maybe reclaiming old well pads or planting right-of-ways after they install a new pipeline with native warm season grasses and pollinators. So we talk about research. So there's a whole other conservation conference if you want to geek out on that. But then they have volunteer seminars for people that host these banquets or people that are just trying to get more involved with the NWTF, how to engage women in the outdoors, mentor programs, shooting programs, membership, college chapters. I mean, there's a whole swath of things that I don't think people even realize is going on upstairs.
Yeah, I've heard over the years I've unfortunately not been able to attend it, as crazy as that is. As much as I'm into the NWTF and turkey hunting, it always comes at a bad time because I've taken time off for deer season. That's just wrapping up, and I'm trying to get prepared for turkey season, and it's just hard to make another out-of-town trip at that time of the year. But I always have a lot of different friends that go, and I've heard a lot about these seminars, and I've heard a lot of interesting things that were kind of regurgitated to me from people who did attend and heard these different things, and that's one of my I don't know if I'd go as far as say bucket list things, but that's one of the things that I really want to do is to be able to go and spend a day listening to these things because I'm kind of a sponge when it comes to that kind of thing. I like to be provoked into thought and thinking more deeply about things, and just some of the local seminars that I've heard at different outdoor things, and a lot from Mr. David and Mr. Jimmy here locally. They're very interesting, and I think that as a hunter and someone who leases land or owns land and manages that land, it's so important to not only understand how to be a good sportsman and a good ethical hunter, but also how to be a good gamekeeper and all those things. And I've heard a lot about that at the convention. And then the calling contest is, if you're into that kind of thing, that's pretty cool. You can watch
It is
that.
unbelievable. I mean, to just go in that room and sit and watch, even for just an hour, it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
the amount of talent and the amount of people and the skill. It's
like a quiet rock concert.
It is. It's incredible. It's absolutely. I can't even explain to you what it's like just to sit in that room and watch.
Well, next year, if you're listening and that interests you, next year, if this time of the year they actually play the entire calling contest, the prelims and the finals and everything on Facebook Live. So if you go to the NWTF Facebook page, they have a Facebook Live feed going for the whole contest. And, I've done the calling contest, and I have good friends that have actually won big in the calling contest and the regional states and Grand Nationals. And I've done some of that myself. And, I've been fortunate enough to be around these guys and watch a lot of these contests. And it's crazy to me because, truthfully, every one of them sound better than a lot of hens that you hear in the woods. And it's like, how do you judge? You get that final, whatever it is in the open, they got like 12 finalists or something like that. Those 12 guys go up there and they do their routine, and it's like, hey, how you going to, granted, some of them sound a little different than the other one, but how are you going to say one of those is better than the other one?
I'll tell you what really blows my mind is the hoot owl competition. Yeah. The friction, that's a lot of talent, and that's really cool. But like listening to people imitate the owls is just, it's nuts. If you close your eyes, you're in the woods.
Well, I feel that way about the gobbling competitions. A gobble is a really hard sound to replicate, and now they've got these new calls over the last several years that they're like, kind of like, to be honest, as a call maker myself, I'll tell you the smoke, the mirror, smoke and mirrors of it it's a goose call is what it is. It's just a modified goose call, and you just blow it differently than you would a goose call. But those have bridged the gap to that. But these guys that gobble with their natural voice and they use these old latex reed tube calls, and if you close your eyes or turn your head, you'd think there's a turkey gobbling in the room with you, and that's a very unhuman sound to make. Mm-hmm. And the hoot owl, the same thing too. These guys perfect the cadence and the pitches, and it's really impressive. So if you're into that kind of thing, that's one of the really cool. I would say probably one of the big draws to the convention, because it's the Super Bowl of turkey calling.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to touch on, you had talked about wanting to come to the volunteer seminars, and I don't want people to think that they have to travel all the way to Nashville to do that. So some other opportunities where you can attend these volunteer seminars, a lot of the states are putting on district workshops where they'll do maybe 4 or 5 regional kind of daily or weekend long workshops where you can attend these seminars and hear from different state agencies or federal partners or NRCS on cost share programs. We actually had one in Caddo Parish last year, I think in October, and we had like 100 landowners attend, and we just connected them with their local NRCS office and explain to them all the things that they can do to help manage their properties to make it better for brood rearing and just all things turkey management. And a lot of them ended up, following up with that NRCS office, applying for cost share, and now they're getting a little bit of federal dollars to implement these management practices on their property.
That's real. I'm really excited to hear that there are that many private landowners that are willing to invest in their property and do it, educate themselves to do it. That's what more can you ask for? That's a very positive step forward. You mentioned in you and I's communication before this, when we talked about, what we were going to talk about with this podcast, one of the things that you mentioned was the symposium that happens every 5 years. And, what is that all about? And give us the rundown on that.
So there's two things. One's kind of like the volunteer seminar, is the National Leadership Conference. So that's in Augusta, Georgia. We do that one every 3 years, and it allows NWTF members and volunteers to come and learn about the organization and what's being done in their state or region, to learn about these management practices and these opportunities. And then the symposium happens every 5 years. I think the next one is 2021 in Asheville. And it's where students can come present their research. We just give like a State of the Union essentially on what's going on in turkeys in the nation. We have a bunch of wildlife professionals come talk. It just gives people an opportunity to see what's going on with turkeys, get an update, what's been going on in the last 5 years, where are we going, where have we been, what are we doing now. So yeah, that one's in Asheville, North Carolina, 2021. I don't think they have a date solidified yet.
That's really cool. I think that one of the great things that I think the NWTF does, and I think every organization in any walk of life should do, is they're really open and transparent, I feel like, about a lot of the things that they're into. I think as humans, we're naturally a little bit lazy when it comes to seeking these things out, but they're there. And things like the convention and things like the symposium and the volunteer seminars that they help put on, and all of that, it's easy to see your financial and your time put into the organization or the federation as it is, and what it's doing. So I think that all that's really good, and I like talking to you because you give a much more positive outlook than it feels like sometimes when you hunt all weekend and it's like, man, there's cutovers everywhere and I can't get a turkey to gobble. But I know that a lot of our listeners on this podcast are, this is a new podcast, and our listenership is really, probably Louisiana, Mississippi, and in the South, and hopefully we grow. But for now, and then also because you're our Louisiana District Biologist, what are you working on? What is the NWTF doing right now in the state of Louisiana as far as your office goes?
So we have a couple different projects going on. One that I'm super proud of is the agreement that we have with the Forest Service, which is a stewardship agreement. So basically what happens is the Forest Service identifies a timber sale, and NWTF purchases that timber. We contract out someone to cut it, send it to the mill, and all the money that we make from that timber sale, we put back on the forest in the form of mid-story reduction, prescribed fire, food plots, erosion control, noxious weed eradication, just general forest health improvement practices. And so we have a couple going on now. The Caney one, we were on all 3 units of the Caney Ranger District. That was a 10-year agreement that actually we just wrapped up in February. And then the one on the Vernon, that's the Vernon unit of the Calcasieu Ranger District. And we are in the process of renewing that agreement. And actually, that was the one, I think you tagged me in it on Facebook. I wrote an article about what we're doing over there.
Oh, yeah, I did. That was a really good article. That was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I was super proud of that one because we're doing a lot of really cool stuff. A lot of it's in the name of the red cockaded woodpecker or the quail, but when we manage habitat for them, it's making really good brood rearing habitat for turkeys, and it's adjacent to a lot of really good nesting habitat. And then those longleaf pines are really good roost trees. So it was a right fit for us. But another cool thing is we took one of the burn units, and it was burned in one unit. It was about 1,000 acres, and we broke it up into 15 different units. And now we burn, maybe 6 to 8 of those units every other year. So it's like more of a mosaic rotating schedule, and it gives a more diverse landscape so these birds don't have to move in and out of that forest compartment or travel as far when we do the prescribed burning.
That eliminates their exposure to predation as much as anything, correct?
I mean, it's essentially the more they move, the more at
Yeah.
risk they are.
So for
So,
people that might not know, and I honestly, don't know exactly what part of the state is Caney and Calcasieu.
so the Caney Ranger District is around like Minden, all the way up to I think Homer. I think is the town up there. So it's just north of I-20,
So
just east of Bossier,
okay.
north of Minden.
Hmm.
The Vernon is like Leesville area, Pitkin.
Okay. Okay. So most of this is central Louisiana that we're talking about in this program.
Yeah, so those two agreements that we have are only on the Caney Ranger District and the Calcasieu Ranger District. However, I'm trying to work with Forest Service to get one on the Win, one on the Kisatchie, and one on the Catahoula, so that I can work on all 5 ranger districts.
Cool. Very cool. So, it's worth mentioning to me anyway. When you said that, I'm super excited to hear about this from the quail perspective because I've never been able to. I grew up hearing stories of my grandfathers and my dad as a kid quail hunting, and we haven't had a sustainable huntable population of quail in Southwest Mississippi or Louisiana anywhere that I've lived in my life. And I've always wanted to be able to do it, if nothing else, because it's kind of sentimental. Because I know that, like you referenced back in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't much turkey hunting, and the deer hunting wasn't like it is now either. And my grandfathers, they came up bird hunting, and we've not had that in our generation. So that's awesome. I hope that those things continue to grow because I would love for that to make a comeback.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got, I mean, there's a lot of cool projects that, like I said, they benefit other species. And sometimes we have to use that other species to get the work done just because that's where the money is. Like,
Yeah.
the red-cockaded woodpeckers is a federally threatened species, so if we're doing work that benefits them, we can kind of guarantee that the Forest Service is going to maintain those areas, the money's going to be constantly flowing into that work, so as long as we're minding our P's and Q's to get stuff done for the RCW, then the turkeys are going to do well in that area also. So you got to play the game a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's but that's whatever it takes. And like you said, if you're benefiting multiple species and doing it, then all the better. One thing that and maybe there's not a lot of info here, but Mr. Jimmy mentioned in the last podcast, the number one thing that he thinks has contributed to the decline of turkey numbers in the state in his lifetime is the loss of prescribed fire. And I wonder, is anything that you're doing or that you're affiliated with, is there anything happening to try to implement more of that and get back to those practices, at least somewhere?
Yeah, so when it comes to the prescribed fire, a lot of what we do is on the state level and the private landowner level. So from a state perspective, we take some of our banquet raised dollars and match them with Pittman Robertson funds from the state to do prescribed burning on a lot of the WMAs. And so that kind of helps those areas on state lands. But then another cool thing is that we wrote for a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we got it for 2018 to 2020. And with that grant money, we have a forester now working in, oh boy, I hope I can get all these. Allen, Beauregard, Sabine, Natchitoches, Rapides, and Vernon. Yeah, that's 6. So he's working in those 6 parishes, and he meets with private landowners and writes them management plans and offers them cost share assistance to do things like prescribed burning. And a lot of them are also getting cost share assistance for longleaf pine establishment. So if they plant pines, they get a little bit of money from this grant. If they burn, they get a little money, and it really kind of encourages landowners to do that. And then another thing with that grant is landowner field days. Well, a lot like we did in Caddo Parish, where we invite all these landowners to learn things. We have a couple, actually one coming up in August. It was supposed to start tomorrow, but they ended up rescheduling. It's in Woodworth, and it's a learn and burn landowner workshop put on by the Longleaf Alliance where you can go learn about prescribed fire. You can become a certified burner through some of these classes with the Nature Conservancy and LDWF, and then you can learn how to burn your own property. So it really kind of encourages landowners to not be so intimidated by this tool. And it's cheap. Burning is unbelievably cheap to do. It's just the liability
Yeah.
and the feelings associated with burning that I think hold a lot of people back.
Yeah.
And the state has 3 burn trailers. They're just little like 5x8 enclosed trailers. Everything you need is in there. There's walkie-talkies. There's drip torches. I think there's road signs if you're going to be burning next to a road in case there's smoke issues. Flappers. Everything you need to conduct a burn is in that trailer, and you can rent it from the state. I think it's like $50, and you can take it to your property, do a burn. Everything you need is in there, and then when you're done, just pack it all up and bring it back.
I was told, and I can't remember the source, but someone told me, and this is referring to more timber land, company land, that they've gotten away from it, and their reference was expense and red tape, and not so much expense of the actual burn project, but all of the red tape associated with being able to do it and the resources it takes to actually get it going. And, I think where it came from is I have a piece of property here close to my house in East Feliciana Parish, and right after I leased it, they had done some cutting, a lot of cutting. And I was out there one day, and this helicopter flies up, and he lands out in the middle of one of the food plots out in an open clear cut. And I sat around and talked with the guy, and he was there spraying. And I thought to myself, how can a couple of days of prescribed burning in areas, where it fits, how can that be cheaper than a helicopter full of expensive chemicals? And, then on top of that, I witnessed what that did to my property for 12 months after he sprayed. Now, the pines are growing great. Now, 3 years later, the pines are growing great as far as they're concerned for, tree harvest. But when he sprayed it, it killed everything. Not just the weeds, everything left. All the animals on game camera were gone. All the browse was gone, and it was gone for a year. And,
Yep.
It was bad. It created an absolute dump site. Like, I refer to it as what I would imagine a bomb site looks like for, an extended period of time after the residue has settled. And I thought to myself that, is there something happening in our government, in our laws and legislation that's making it hard for these companies, with red tape? Because I can't see how simply having a crew of guys handling a prescribed burn, the process itself can't be more expensive than renting a helicopter and filling it up over and over with expensive chemicals.
Yeah, I don't know. I've done a little bit of work with herbicides, and I've done a little bit of work with prescribed fire, and I can tell you that the prescribed fire work has always come out cheaper per acre than the herbicide work. So I don't know how, they can use the excuse that it's cheaper. But yeah, from a wildlife perspective, burning's always better because you're getting the good stuff grow back in about a month's time, whereas if you use herbicide, it's dead for months.
Yeah.
Everything's dead. There's no cover. There's no food.
No.
So I always like to use prescribed burning because it just kind of rejuvenates the area, and you get that lush green understory and all of that. Those forbs and those pollinator species and those bunch grasses, they're so good for poults because they attract so many bugs. If you walk out on your hunting lease and I ask you to go find a bunch of bugs, are you not going to walk out to the right of way and look down? You're going to go out to the power line and look down and see crickets and just all sorts of bugs, grasshoppers. So that's where your poults want to be, in those native warm season grasses. They grow all bunched up, so those poults they're tiny, they can run in between all those grasses and hide when they need to. But you're not getting any of that with herbicides. So I don't know, from a wildlife perspective and from a financial perspective, I've got to say fire is always the way to go.
Yeah, well, hopefully y'all's work will continue to promote that and bring it back more. I've noticed over the last week or so. I live in the country and I work in the country, so I travel up to Mississippi every day, and I have noticed a lot more fire. The last couple of weeks, and I'm assuming it's all private property, but I've noticed more than I recall this time of the year in the last several years. So that's encouraging. So one thing that I wonder, and I don't know if you would have any insight in it, but some of these things that we're doing in Louisiana, are you aware of these kind of things happening in our neighboring states? And I mean, are these kind of things happening everywhere?
As far as the management practices and
Just
all the work that we're doing?
Yeah, just the different types of. I mean, obviously it's going to be tailored to state-specific needs. I know, but I mean, it seems like you guys are hard at it, and you're doing a lot of good stuff. And I'm just curious: is the NWTF as active in every state, or is Louisiana one of those target states where you're doing more than maybe other states? Or
So, we're doing a lot of work in a lot of the other states as well, but as far as my position is concerned, it's kind of tailored to where the funds come from. So my position personally, I am funded a quarter by the state, LWF, a quarter by the Forest Service, and then half by NWTF. So my time is essentially split between those three entities, like working on stuff for NWTF and the state board, and then the state and federal. Mississippi is very similar, where the biologist over there does a lot of work with federal and Mississippi Department of Wildlife Parks and MDWFP. Their name is so long. So, but then a little bit different is in Alabama. Their biologist, his position is a little bit different than mine in that he does a lot more work on private land just because of the way that his funding works. So he's doing a lot on private land, which is kind of appropriate because Alabama is a lot like Louisiana, where the majority of the land is under private ownership. So he's doing a lot with private landowners to improve their property, and then does a little bit with public land. But I think he's mostly private land. So it's kind of tailored to how your agreement works and how your funding works. But there's a ton of projects. So I talked earlier about stewardship. NWTF is one of the top 5 timber purchasers for the Forest Service. And we're usually one of the top stewardship agreement partners as well. So as far as working on federal lands, we're usually one of the biggest players. So we're active all over the country doing stuff like I had talked about. So,
as we kind of wind down towards our time here on this pod, what kind of stuff are you? I know we've hit on some of the big projects that are going on, but specifically, day to day with spring approaching, as far as just very turkey specific. What's your day to day like? What are you working on? What do you got going for the spring and that sort of thing?
So, the springtime is usually when I get ready to execute a lot of contracts. Usually in April and May, I start sending out bids to contractors to do a lot of our work on the Forest Service. So I'm usually doing a lot of paperwork right now, which is crappy because I want to be out in the woods, but I'm also like 7.5 months pregnant right now. So I don't know how much woods time I would be getting anyways. But basically in the springtime, I'm getting ready to execute a lot of those contracts for work that's getting ready to be done in April, May, June time.
So your turkey season as a hunter is going to be seriously hampered then.
Oh my gosh, it's not looking good. Although I did get in with a couple people that are taking some kids out for a youth hunt, so that's going to get me out a weekend sooner than I would otherwise, which is probably good because the bigger I get, the less I can move. So yeah. The fact that I can get out a week earlier and hunt and bring some of these kids out on a hunt is definitely going to, help my morale.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Hey, I guess there's always next spring and the circle of life. But
that's right.
I really, really appreciate you coming on. This has been a lot of really good information, and I think the kind of information that a lot of people who may even be members of the NWTF have never had access to or searched out. So it's important, and I'm glad that you're in our state, and I'm glad that we're working towards that, and we are praying for a healthy spring baby, and hopefully you'll get in on a couple of good hunts before that happens.
That's right.
So we're going to wrap up, and thanks again. We're going to have on our show notes page all of Betsy's info, so you can look her up and follow along with what she's up to, as well as the NWTF. So, again, thank you for coming on, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Betsy for taking the time to be on the podcast with me today. And, as she mentioned, 7.5 months pregnant with a young child at home. It's not easy to take that time. So we greatly appreciate her information here and sharing a lot of what's going on with the NWTF. As I mentioned in the interview, I think there's probably a lot of people that are familiar with the NWTF, but maybe have never really learned a lot in depth about where all the fundraising money is going and how it's being used, and where the NWTF came from and where it's going, and what their plans are, both present and future. So that was a lot of really great information, and Betsy's doing great work here in Louisiana, and we need more people like Betsy working hard to better the habitat, better the turkey populations. All of those things are pivotal to the future of our sport. So I hope you'll support the NWTF, and as always, if you check out the show notes page on our website at STRUTCAST.com, we'll have links to Betsy's social media pages, as well as links to NWTF resources and information that we talked about. And you can check all that out, again, at STRUTCAST.com on the Episode 4 show notes page. Also, remind you, check out ScreeGear.com and take advantage of that 10% coupon code at checkout. STRUTCAST is the code. Enter that at checkout and get 10% off your order. And as we close every episode, keep our legislators, our lawmakers, our politicians, our law enforcement officers, and everyone in your prayers. Pray for their discernment and sound decision-making. I hope everyone will take to heart the things that we need to do as outdoorsmen, as hunters, game managers, gamekeepers, and all those things. Secure our hunting heritage for the future. And with that, we will talk to you on episode 5. Thanks again for listening.